Hello and welcome to session number 2 of the Autism Spectrum Disorder After School Special. Thank you all for joining us again. I think our first session had some great conversations in it. And I did want to note that these sessions are being recorded, and also they are being posted to the Learning Services, Student Services YouTube channel, and you can find the link to that in the hub, the CESD hub, so you can just go straight there and you can find all of them. So as you probably know, there are 2 other series that we are currently doing. One right now, this is the Autism Spectrum Disorder series. Another one is the AAC communication series, and another one is instructional leadership. So head on over there for those ones, and we will get started here. So just as a review from last time, of course, everything that we do in education, or especially in inclusive education, is built upon these 6 pillars set out by Alberta Ed. And of course, in Chinook's Edge, we take things just a little bit further and do things our own way to truly reflect our context and our students. And we added in our 5 vital actions for inclusion. So these become the checklist and the indicators of inclusive schools, and give us a roadmap for how we can improve inclusion in our schools and ensure that there is a place and a purpose and appropriate education for all of our students within Chinook's Edge School Division. So today's strategy and today's focus really hones in on removing barriers within the learning environment, anticipating, valuing, and supporting diversity and learning differences, and setting high expectations for all learners, and developing specialized knowledge and skills using data-driven interventions and strategies, and providing specialized student programming. So what we're looking at today, last time we looked at the classroom environment. So the physical environment in which the student exists and does their learning, and how that could be overwhelming, as is the picture on the left, or could be productive and calming, stimulating just enough for a child to learn effectively and pay attention to the things that they're supposed to be paying attention to, rather than walking in the room, being overstimulated, probably leaving. We hope that that's all they do. So once we set up our classroom environment to be calming and regulating for our kids, we want to make sure that they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, when they're supposed to be doing that, and where they're supposed to be doing that. And how we do that is visual schedules. Okay. So we use visual schedules to ensure that students see what's coming next. The important word there is see what's coming next. Not just know what's coming next, but actually visually see it. It provides, by seeing it rather than just hearing it, it provides another mode of input and instruction for that child. And our OT actually helped me understand today that it provides more sensory input. So for those students who seek more and more sensory input, this can be a way to give that to them and fulfill that need for them. Visual schedules support the independence and ownership of the child's day. Visual schedules can reduce anxiety for kids, for everyone, but especially for our kids who already start at a baseline of pretty high anxiety. They actually can increase the flexibility of our students. And when we make things visual, we make that instruction last a lot longer for our kids who have working memory skill lagging skills, or processing lagging skills. So when we put a visual reminder in front of them, then they have that as a reference point long after our words disappear into the air. right? So the keys to a strong visual schedule are that it tells the student what they're supposed to be doing, so what's scheduled for the day or for next, where they're supposed to do that task, and when they're supposed to do that task. So when you're thinking about schedules that are in your building or used by some of your students, think about if they're communicating enough information to the child, and what maybe you're having to supplement with your voice or your actions or physical objects in order to communicate that. Now, there is a misconception that only a few students or only a few people in our buildings or in our lives actually use visual schedules. And it's every single student uses a visual schedule. Every single person generally uses a visual schedule. I personally don't get anything done without my Google Calendar. I know that we provide a visual schedule for every student in a high school. It is on their PowerSchool. In most classes, in Chinook Edge especially, there is a daily schedule written on the board. Whether that's using pictures or it's using words, there's generally a daily schedule because it's good practice and it helps our kids know what's coming next. And I don't know about you, but there was always a calendar in the kitchen in my home growing up because it was hard to keep track of all the kids and where we were going, right? So everybody uses a visual schedule in some way in their life. What we're focused on now today is the students who need an individual schedule, right? So think about these things and your students when you're thinking about if your student needs a visual schedule. So if their schedule is different from the class, like they've got scheduled breaks, they have different tasks that they need to do, or if they have completely different schedule, like they're out of the room, that they would definitely need an individual schedule because theirs is not representative of what is on the board. If they're a student who needs frequent reminders of the schedule, so maybe they always ask questions. What are we doing now? When do we have gym class? When are we going to music? When do I get to go home? All those things, if you're answering those questions all the time, that student probably needs an individual visual schedule. If they need the schedule broken into smaller chunks, so if looking at the board and seeing the full day's schedule and all of those little bits makes them overwhelmed or they can't quite put that together to make action on the next step, they might need it broken down smaller. So whether that looks like it's a half-day schedule or a 3-step schedule, maybe it's a first then, or maybe this is a student that just needs to be shown a picture of where they need to go next, because that is the information that they can hold in their brain and do the expected activity. Another one is that if a child processes information easier with pictures than they do with words, then a visual schedule would be very beneficial for them, right? So if their comprehension works better with pictures, use a visual schedule. So when we think about visual schedules, then we get into the questions of, okay, what do they look like? How many pieces are on it? How do I store it? How do I build it, right? So before we get into those questions, we really need to consider the reading ability of the children, the visual needs of the children. Obviously, if there are any vision challenges for a child, we're going to need to make sure that there's some good contrast on the pages. Maybe we're using black paper rather than white paper. We're using big pictures. Or if they've got great vision, we can use small pictures. We need to consider their dexterity because they should be able to manipulate their schedule in some way on their own. We should look at the visual complexity. So do they need one picture on a item or can they handle some words and pictures? We need to consider that the schedules need to be consistent among the adults working with that child. So if you have a picture of a star, and to one adult, that means surprise or treat or special event. But to a different teacher, that means the iPad game Starfall. That can be very confusing for the child, right? So we want to make sure that whatever objects or pictures or however our visual schedules look, that it's easy for the adults to be consistent for the child. And how skilled is the student at generalizing pictures and tasks within context? So do they need to have the specific, the real pictures of where they're going and what they're supposed to be doing? Or can they generalize with symbols and clip art style pictures instead? All things to consider before we get into all the decisions about what makes up a visual schedule and how to make some for our students. So there are 4 kind of categories of how we can look at visual schedules. The first one we're going to talk about is a concrete visual schedule. So this actually takes objects that represent a task or an activity for a child. So in these images, you can see that on the right, they've paired a picture, a word, and an object for this child to know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So for music, it looks like they've got a little tiny shaker. For recess, they've got a half of a soccer ball. They've got a little tiny paintbrush for art. So it becomes tactile, sensory. They get the verbal or the visual input with the picture, and they get the words. The words might be on there so that the adults are consistent though. And then another thing to note there is that there is a little pouch for when that's all done. So what that tells me is this was designed so that the child could pull off either the object or the picture and put it in the all done pouch to signify that that is done. Music is done. But when they look at it the next time, they don't have to look at music anymore. They know it's done. They can read it from left to right and know that whatever's on the farthest left is what they're supposed to be doing right now. The picture on the right has different object style visuals to use. So for eating, they chose a fork. Seems like a pretty logical connection there. If you have a student who does have some low vision, this might be a great strategy because they may need to feel the object in order to understand what that task is going to be. If they don't read Braille, this would probably be a good strategy, depending on the student, of course, right? And all of these objects need to be taught and paired with the meaning in order for them to become effective. You're not just going to hand one of these visuals to a child for the first time and them know exactly what to do with it. There's a lot of coaching and modeling that comes along with it. The second kind is a photographic visual schedule. So we look at real pictures of what's going on. It might be the picture of the location. It might be a picture of the child doing the task. So if the task is task bins, you'd have a picture of the student, their task bin structure or their work system, and their work likely out, and they're doing it because that shows this is what I'm supposed to look like when I'm doing my task bin. It could be pictures of the environment that you're going to. It could be pictures of if you're going to play soccer, it could be a picture of a real soccer ball. It could be a picture of a person that you're going to see. Another thing that you'll notice about, especially the one on the left, is that there's times there. So not only are you then teaching a child about what a clock looks like and what that looks like when time is passing, but also you're pairing the when, the where, and the what on that visual schedule. So all that information is there. On the one on the right, you'll notice it doesn't have times, but how this upholds that it has to show the child the when of when they're doing it. The timing on this is that it's the progression of how these activities happen through the day. So first they do the chart, then it's book time, then it's snack. So that's the when, right? As soon as we're done our chart, then we do our book time. A third one would be a representative visual schedule. So this one takes the clip art pictures to represent the task that they're wanting to do. So for many visual schedules that I've seen before, they're using either widget or board maker or lesson picks style clip arts, or they're just finding pictures online. And let's say it's classroom, it's got a picture of a teacher, or it's a picture of a desk. It's task bin time. I've got a picture of a student sitting in a desk, a little clip art. It's gym time. Maybe there's a little clip art of soccer ball or a basketball. So this is important, and this is appropriate for a child when the child can generalize from a cartoon picture to what is actually expected of them in that situation. Once again, you have to pair the picture with the meaning, and that takes repetition. So you're not, once again, you're not just going to say to a child, here's your visual, you know what to do, the first time they ever see that. They're going to see that soccer ball, and they're going to need to be explicitly taught and modeled that that means gym class and not specifically soccer, right? One thing I'd like to point out about the visual schedule on the right, so it's in a binder. This one has a finished envelope on there. So the idea behind this visual schedule is that the adult would set this up at the beginning of the day, and then the child would be able to go through the day with prompting and with support, likely, and peel off the visual cards and put them in that finished bin. Once again, signifying that there's no extra information that they have to have on that page. They're just looking in the same spot every time and knowing that the first item that they see is the task that is next. Okay. With the ones on the left, we're assuming that these children can handle a little bit more of that visual complexity. So they can see that there was tasks up above, but they've already done it. So in Misabel's weekly schedule, she's crossing it off with a white erase marker or with a marker. And so that's how she's interacting with her schedule to know that she's moving through that schedule and she's completing the task that she's supposed to be completing. Okay. And then the last version of a visual schedule would be one that just has words on it. So if the child has really strong reading skills and they can gain the meaning from reading the words without pictures, then a written schedule might be appropriate for that child. I've got a bunch of different examples on here. And I wanted to really point out that even though it's just using words, in the left-hand side of the slide, you can see a first then with just words. So just because a child is able to just use words and not pictures, in a moment, they might be really frustrated with the fact that they have to do their math before their iPad. So you strip away all of that extra from their other visual schedule or the visual schedule that's on the board, and you just give them, you just have to do your math, and then you get your iPad. You remove all the other visual stimuli, and that child might be able to move forward with their the expected tasks. Here we've also got one that the student would be able to peel off and probably put in a all done bin. We've got weekly schedules and we've got daily schedules. So each of these shows that the time and the what they're supposed to be doing. The one that gets left out most often is the where. And that's okay, as long as there's something else that shows you exactly where that task is supposed to happen, especially if it happens away from that child's typical learning environment. So in the one on the right, I designed this one with the time, exactly what they were supposed to be doing, and then where they were supposed to be doing that. Any blanks there are for during the day. I can fill in with a whiteboard marker. I can write in there exactly where that break is going to happen. So that allows for some of that flexibility. So when the next question is always, okay, how many tasks do they need to see? We've got the schedule figured out. We know what they're doing in the day, but how many tasks will they see? Well, we can go from one picture to a full week, right? And it just depends on exactly what the child can handle and move forward with without getting overwhelmed. Obviously, we go from a more support to less support. And we would likely be moving children and students in from left to right on this continuum of support with their visuals. So if we look at one picture, so how this one would work is that you would hand or show the child the picture of the desk, and you would say, it's time for teach. We're having our teach time now. Let's go see Mrs. Rennick. Okay, so then you would show that to them, and then you would move along with that visual. So they've seen it on the way to see their teacher. They can start to process that, and they know exactly where they're going. The next step might be 2 visuals, so they can see what they're doing right now and what they're doing next. So using that first then is a great strategy for any students who can handle a lot, but they can handle the next step. This is also a great one to pull out in the moment when a kid is having struggles finishing an unpreferred task because they know that that preferred task is coming, right? The next one might be that they can handle 3 steps. So they can do a first, next, then, or they can do a now, next, then. But this also helps with that. We've got our stuff going on right now, and then we get to our preferred stuff later. Another one might be that you have a chunk of tasks, and at the end, you've got a break or a choice. Okay. This might look like the student gets to choose what their choice is. They might have a different choice board that lists all of their options for that time. Okay. Once again, visuals. So this one would include a chunk of tasks until the break. One might be a half day. So if you know that kids get overwhelmed by that full day and they like to break that day into, okay, I just got to get through lunch, and then I've got the second half of my day. Or maybe the structure in your school is that you have one staff member working with a student in the morning and a different staff member working with a student in the afternoon. That is helpful to have. You can have 2 separate schedules there because there's a natural break in who is supporting that child. So depending on the kid, this might be the right amount of schedule for them. Of course, you can have a full day schedule where this one actually shows it on a folder. Likely there's more tasks on the inside that they can pull out and put on top if needed. And then you can always have a full week. I don't know very many students who use visual picture style schedules that could handle a full week schedule, but it could be really beneficial to plan out those where the schedule changes throughout the week, right? Because some days you have music in the mornings and you got phys ed in the afternoons, or you have an assembly on Wednesday. You have the Remembrance Day ceremony. That's a change that maybe there needs to be some prep for, or there's no school on Friday. That might need to be prepared for a child. So having a visual schedule for the week can help with some of those long-term prep style strategies to reduce anxiety and reduce challenging behaviors in the moment. So another question is, okay, so now I have to carry this schedule around, or the student has to carry this schedule around, or where do we put it in the classroom? So there's all kinds of options for you about how you can do that and how you can organize and arrange your schedule. One way to do it is that it could be a digital one. So there's a bunch of apps out there that you could use for that. Another thing that you could do is you could make the schedule and take a picture of it, right? So if the child has if it's an older student and they have a device and they don't want to carry a visual schedule with them, they could take a picture of their schedule and have it on their phone for reference at any time that they need it. You could put it in a do-a-tang or a folder and have all of your options on the inside there. This actually works really well when you have a combo of a student who likes to know the full day, but when they're actually looking at the instruction of what to do next, they do better with a first then schedule. They like the security of knowing what their full day looks like, but in actual practice in the moment, just 2 images works better for them. So on the inside of the folder, they've got their full day. On the outside of the folder, they have a first then. That works really nicely for some students as well. You can have it in a binder, and I've seen this a lot where there's little mini binders with a whole bunch of plastic tabs on the inside. And you're going to need to invest in quite a bit of Velcro and some laminating so that you can make this productive for you and easy to use. Another thing is that if a student is generally in one classroom for the majority of their day, maybe it's most appropriate that that schedule is posted on the wall. As we know, with most of our classrooms, they have their visual schedule on the board. Teachers not picking that up and carrying it with them, but it still works well for those children. You could, if the schedule stays in the room where their students' programming usually is, if you're going to the gym, let's say, you could take the next task after gym with you. So you go to the gym, you transition there, then when gym is over, you have the next schedule item to show the student so that they can transition easily to the next task. You're still using the visual schedule without carrying it around. Many students who use communication devices also require visual schedules. And what I have seen some people do is put a first then on the back of their iPad case. So then there's not something else to carry around there. Now, usually the question comes, okay, great, but life is unpredictable. Sometimes there has to be changes. Schools can be generally unpredictable places, right? Other kids bring up unexpected events or challenges. There's always assemblies and fire drills and things that change the schedule for a child, whether they're expected, we know they're happening that day, or they happen on the moment and we have to adapt. But when a schedule is generally predictable for a child and they have a good idea about what is happening, they have more space to be adaptable when needed, right? And there's a lot of things that we can do to prep a child when we know that a change is going to happen. And we want to do that as far in advance as possible so that they get a chance to process the fact that a change is happening. And possibly practice with a trusted adult how they can respond and practice the regulation strategies that they can use if that change is really hard for them. So one strategy there is that you create a symbol or a word that means that there is a change happening and that cues the child to use whatever regulation strategies work best for them to cope with the change. So here we have the child's schedule and this student is getting off the bus and they have to put their backpack in the cubby, and then it's usually gym class outside, let's say, but it is -40. we cannot go outside. So we have a symbol. For this one, I chose a lightning bolt because that comes out of nowhere. So if we knew that we weren't going to be able to go outside for gym, then in the morning, that trusted adult would go over the schedule with the child and say, you know what, instead of gym outside, we're having gym inside. And so that symbol of a change will help the student regulate through that change, or at least prep for how they can cope with that change. Because we know that throwing that on them in the moment when they are ready to go outside, they've got their hat on and their jacket and their mitts and they're ready to go, and then someone tells them that they can't go outside as they're reaching for the door handle, we know that that's not going to go very well. So we want to prep them in as far in advance as possible and give them those tools to be successful. And then you can talk through what you are going to do in that time, so it's an easier transition for them. Yeah. I found a great article in this book for these visual schedules. This would be a resource that you could definitely purchase if you would like more, or we actually might have it in our IMC library for loan if that is something that you are interested in. So please let us know. Yeah, that is the end of my presentation. Yeah, got it in just about under a half hour. I did see a question pop up in our chat box. So how do you know if a student needs real life photos or if you can use representative photos in their schedule? Great question. So it depends. It does depend on the child, and it depends on their ability to apply generalization to a context. And it might be that they use trial and error. So if you are showing a child cartoons and they're not responding in a way that, or clip art pictures, and they're not responding or not quite getting it that that's what that means, then you might need to switch it up to be real life photos. You might need to use a combination of real life and representative photos in the schedule as well. So like you could have pictures of people and then cartoon pictures of the classroom. That is a great question though, Lana. I don't have the SLP or psychology answer for you today. Could you maybe? Oh, we have our SLP and our OT here. Do you have an answer for me?
Oh. I was just going to say, from my perspective, if they're in pre-K and they have ASD or they're nonverbal or they're really struggling, I would always start with real pictures. It's just one less thing for them to have to try to interpret, especially if we're using it when they're dysregulated. It's just always better to start with real pictures, especially when they're that little.
Nicole, you just brought up a really important point as well. You said especially when they're dysregulated. So for some students, they may not need a visual schedule all the time, but we need to have it available for them when they're having a hard time, right? Because when a student is not doing well, they're having a challenge moving through a transition, putting more words onto them and into their environment will not help generally. But using visuals can help them move along can help them to process the change or process the transition way better than words will, right? So like I said at the beginning, a word is said and then it disappears. But a picture, you can put that in front of them and then they can refer back to that as many times as they need to until they have understood what is being asked of them. So when our brain slows down, when we're having a hard time, we can use the pictures in order to process that, even though it might take us a little bit longer. So have it available all the time, practice using it. Even if you feel like they don't need it all the time, practice it and have it available. so that it's there for them in the hard moments. Annette, you had a question.
Well, actually, it was also to go with that visual thing, because yesterday I went to Temple and she was saying that sometimes, depending on how their autism is with their visuals, sometimes when they see in pictures, because she said like people like her speech or whatever would show her stuff, and for visuals for the pictures, she said like it was just like lines for like a steeple, but for her brain she didn't understand what that was. And real pictures, she was seeing cathedrals and she was seeing like big chapels and stuff. She wasn't just seeing lines. So that would be, she would get not upset, confused with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also another thing I learned really yesterday with Temple, also, I know it's not yours, but for the classrooms, she says if you put your phone on slow-mo and you go like you have the lights on and you record your classroom in slow-mo, it'll show you if the lights are flickering. And that's one of the setups for the kids. And I found that very interesting. So I just want to share that.
Thank you. That would be very interesting to see. Thank you for that. Could you show the students some clip art images and ask them what they think those things mean in a school context? Once again, depending on the child, sure, but I think it should be up to us to create the meaning in those visuals for our students, right? So if we are, if we take a picture of a classroom and we're creating the meaning that we're going to the classroom to sit at the carpet, then that student will learn that that's what that means, right? If we pull a picture of a butterfly, we could say that that means that we're going outside, right? We can create the meaning behind what our visuals actually mean. If you have a fairly verbal child, you could create those visuals together though, right? So maybe that clip art is exactly what they need to have, and they can create their visuals for their visual schedule. So I love your idea about involving the student in it though. Are there any other questions? So many of the images that I found for this presentation, you can do a very easy Google search about visual schedules and you will see hundreds of examples of how to build them and what they could look like. So then you can see exactly what you want to do for your student and what might work for your student. So what I put in this slideshow is definitely not the only options for visual schedules. There are hundreds of options out there, and you just need to use what works for your child, for your student. And you might start with one version and you'll end with something very, very different. And that's what we want. We want to be responsive to the child's needs. We want to ensure that the visual schedules that we're using are working for them. And you might get some feedback from the students about that this one doesn't work, or it's too much, or it's too little, or they can advance in their prompting, or they can do it by themselves even. But always having the option of the visual schedule is very important for those hard moments. Taking that away entirely makes those hard moments even harder for students, especially students with autism. So if there are no more questions, thank you so much for joining me today. This session was recorded and it will be online on the Chinook's Edge YouTube channel, so you can go back and look again. But you can also let your coworkers and school staffs know that these are available for you and for your reference as well. So thank you all so much for joining and have a fantastic Tuesday evening.
Thank you.